Hello, Wildlings. I hope you're doing well. I wanted to jump on here today because since this morning I have just had this feeling that I wanted to speak on something that I didn't think that I would speak about on the channel, and that is a connection with the well-known deity called Anubis. Now, I know that my practice primarily is always focused in the Celtic pantheon and workings with the green folk, um, but sometimes there is energies that come forth, especially when you start to practice witchcraft, that aren't what you expect or aren't what you reach out for or aren't what you anticipate. And you can try and ignore those energies as much as you want, and obviously you are under no will to actually work with them if you don't wish to. But it was different with Anubis, and I wanted to just speak to that a little bit because Venus is in Scorpio right now, and I love this energy. It is all about finding beauty in the macabre and the gothic, dark sensuality of the liminal spaces, and that is very much realms that I feel very comfortable in. So it's not going to be very structured. I have a few main points to hopefully keep me on topic, but it is probably going to be a bit more of a loose, relaxed chat, so hopefully you're up for that. So rather than a cup of tea, if you're able, I would highly recommend a glass of wine or something dark and sensuous, and let's get into it. So I'm not going to go into a scholarly talk about what Anubis is about or what he represents as a deity, because there's so much content on YouTube that you can view for your own pleasure. So if you haven't heard the name Anubis before, then I highly recommend you go and watch any number of the fantastic informative videos that are out there on YouTube currently. But this is going to be more of a personal experience, me relating to you, how this energy has come into my life one-to-one, so that you might be able to recognize one of his many faces in your own practice of witchcraft or whatever other practice that you undertake, and maybe just shed a different light on what is out there in terms of the more scholarly, factual, historical aspect of Anubis. So from a very early age, I was always a little bit strange, we'll put it like that. And what I mean by that is I didn't really fit in with the other children that were around me, while the other kids were wanting to play with Barbies and, you know, play horses and all of those types of things. I had the Nazgul and the Ring Wraiths as my dolls. I had action figures from Lord of the Rings when I was a child. I was fascinated with all of that darker side of things. I wanted to play vampires and werewolves and anything that was more powerful and gothic and darker, and I wasn't very girly or soft. And what I mean by soft is I wasn't hyper feminine in the sense of pink and sparkly and all of those things. I was always very much drawn to the darker side of things, and not evil, just want to clarify that, not evil, but I always preferred that aesthetic. It was always something that attracted me. And I remember very early on as a child sitting in my bedroom and being quite overwhelmed with the things that I was picking up at night. I was picking up a lot of energies, a lot of activity, and I just vividly remember being so aware of all of this activity that was around me that I was just sitting on my bed one night and I was like, please, please, don't let me see anything. Don't let me see anything, because I'm so scared or I'm so nervous. And I always felt like there was a masculine presence that was in the room, and I want to say a darker masculine presence, but I feel like that can get misconstrued really easily. When I mean dark, I don't mean, like I said, negative or evil. That's a very separate thing. I don't mean that at all. By dark, I just mean it wasn't, you know, all light. It wasn't a bright, shining, glittering sort of energy. And if you work with energy, you'll kind of understand what I mean. It wasn't like a light feeling. It was something a bit more primal, a bit more earthy, a bit heavier, a bit denser. And I was very aware of it. But I never felt in danger. I always felt very safe. And like I said, I found comfort in the darkness. I found comfort in the darker aspects of life and the darker aesthetic. So fast forward many years later, when I was about 17, 18, I started my practice with witchcraft, although I wouldn't have called it witchcraft back then particularly. I was kind of just dabbling in things, and I would say very early on I started working with an aspect of witchcraft called hedge witchcraft, which we talk about here on the channel, and I talk about on my social media platforms if you want to go follow those. But essentially with hedge witchcraft, what you are attempting to do is you are attempting to cross the hedge. And there's been so many different variations of this throughout so many different cultures across the ages. It's essentially a shamanic way of altering one's state of awareness to be from this plane and then crossing over into an awareness of the spirit realm. And one of the first experiences that I remember having that was really vivid was when I was going into my journeying. There was always a fox that was present, a red fox, a European red fox, which is a native species here in the UK. And so I've always felt incredibly connected to the fox, because every single time that I would journey, this fox would appear and it would guide me through what I now know are the realms of Faery, which is what we call it in the Celtic practice. Is essentially the astral realm, if you are looking at it from another perspective, where things are here of this earth, but they are essentially another layer that sits on top of the one that we experience as humans. For the longest time, I actually thought that the fox was my spirit animal. I never properly went to check, but I just kind of thought that it was, because it was always around me every time that I went and journeyed. I now know that's not the case. I now know that it is actually an owl that is my spirit totem. But the fox was just always there and has always been super close and has always been a guide into the underworld for me. Now, I didn't really think anything of it because a fox is a native species here in the UK, as I said. So I didn't really put two and two together. But it was always there, as I said. And then a few years into my practice, I remember having this really vivid dream, and it's one of, I dream every single night without fail. I always dream, and it's always incredibly vivid, and I tend to remember them, but there was something about this dream that really stands apart from the normal dreams that I have. And what I remember is I was in an old childhood home, and there was a lot of people in the house, people that I didn't recognize, but energetically I did recognize them. They all had different faces, but I knew them to be my guides. They didn't have the same feeling as they do when I dream about other human beings. So I acknowledged that, but I wasn't really focusing on who they were or what their faces were, but they were all kind of sat in a circle and they were all kind of chanting, and I knew that they were doing some kind of a ritual, but I wasn't really engaged with it. I was more just a passive entity that was like experiencing it. And I remember sort of going into the room where they were doing it, and to the right of me, this huge black void just opened up, and there was two pillars either side of it. And I remember feeling so drawn to go down this dark tunnel, if you will. And all I can describe it as was this incredibly deep, powerful, primal voice came from the void and basically beckoned me to come into it. And I didn't feel frightened in the sense of I felt like I was at risk or I was at danger. I didn't get that feeling at all. But I didn't feel ready. I didn't feel ready yet to go into it. I was sort of stood there, and there was this immense, hypnotic, magnetic pull that was pulling me into this portal, essentially, which I now know or recognize to be the gates to the underworld realm. And like I said, I wasn't frightened. I just didn't feel like I was ready to go down that journey yet. And so I turned away and I ignored the voice. And I always think back to that dream and wish that I had gone down that portal, because I do feel it was some sort of an initiation that had come to me perhaps when I wasn't quite ready. I was very immersed in my spiritual practice at the time, but I just wasn't quite ready to go down into that darker path. And again, when I say darker, I don't mean negative or evil or harmful or anything like that. I just mean in opposition of the light, in opposition of all this love and light and pink and fluffiness that we see so much of in the New Age community as it stands. I really wish I'd gone down it, but I know that looking back on it in hindsight, that it wasn't the right time, and I think it was just presenting me with this path that I had the option of going down then and there, but I think actually more it was a test to see if I knew that I wasn't quite ready. And obviously then many years later I was. So I try not to regret it too much, but I just remember how much the dream stuck with me because it was so visceral, and the voice was like nothing I'd ever heard in any of my dreams. And as I said, I've dreamt every single night since I was a child. I've had lucid dreams. I've had a very vivid, active dream life my entire life. But there was something about this voice that just spoke from the void. It was consuming and powerful, but incredibly magical and incredibly comforting as well. Now, many more years pass, and at this point, I still didn't quite have an awareness of Anubis. I obviously knew who he was, what he was a deity related to, but because my practice was always focused in the Celtic pantheon, I tried very hard to keep my focus and my studies on working and actively seeking out relationships with the deities that were associated with my ancestors. And so I really tried to avoid working with deities from other pantheons. And so I hadn't really put two and two together at this point. So I had had obviously the experiences when I was a child, the experience with the fox guiding me through into the underworld realms when I was doing my hedge witch work. And then I had this dream. And I do remember in the dream, or after the dream even, that it impacted me so much that I then went on and did some exploratory work to see if I could identify what the energy was that might have presented itself in the dream. And I do remember that that was kind of the first inclination that I had, that there was some kind of a death god, some kind of an underworld masculine deity that was interested in working with me, or that had taken notice, I guess, or was somehow sort of attached to what I was doing. And that was kind of like the first inclination. But again, I kind of just like swept it to the side and carried on and focused more on my Celtic aspects of my craft. Now, many years later, I just vividly remember being sat doing some sort of ritual work, and this overwhelming presence just entered the room again. And I just saw it clearly. I just saw it clearly in my head, and I just heard his name, Anubis. I just saw the energy enter the room, and I heard its name, and I was shocked because I wasn't doing anything that was actively trying to reach out to this deity. I wasn't even focused on that stuff. I'm pretty sure I wasn't even doing deity work. I was just doing other forms of my practice. But this energy just came into the room and was so demanding and told me straight away who it was. I wasn't even thinking about it. I wasn't even immersed in the Egyptian pantheon or anything like that, as I said. But it just came through very, very clearly. And it was like then all of a sudden all these images and these memories started to flood back to me of these events that had sort of sporadically happened over the years and throughout my life, that I could kind of link back to this energy of this deity who is called Anubis, but there is many other names for him, but we'll get into that a little bit later. And it just kind of all clicked. And people who have had these moments in their practice will understand it's kind of like all of a sudden all of that hindsight just kind of floods in at one moment, and it's kind of like a download. It just kind of, all the pieces fit together. It's like a jigsaw that finally you put that final piece and it's like, whoa, you can just see the overall image of what you've been trying to build over this period of time. So he came in, and as I said, with the fox thing, it was really interesting because when I thought of Anubis, I always thought of him as that jackal, right? That's how he is drawn in the hieroglyphs. That's how he's presented in modern day art, as a jackal. And I always thought, for some reason, that a jackal was a dark brown or black, because that's how he's always kind of been painted in art. Considering I did an undergraduate in zoology, I should know that that actually isn't the case. And then after doing some searching, realized that the jackal that Anubis is actually styled after, if you will, is actually a beautiful desert sandy red color. So very similar to the European red fox that was showing up in my hedge riding. And it was a really amazing moment of clarification for me, where I kind of realized that these energies and these deities that we work with, if you follow this path of witchcraft or shamanic practice, whichever you do, they're all one and the same. They all present themselves to various degrees and in various aspects in a way that can be understood by the person and the culture that surrounds that person, so that when they experience this energy, they can interpret it in a way that they recognize, in a way that they understand. Obviously, I'm here in the UK, in Britain, so Anubis to me presented as a European red fox, because if suddenly a jackal came in and I was very blinkers on, like, no, I'm trying to focus my practice in what my ancestors would have practiced and how they moved through the world. And so often tropical or exotic animals will come through for me. They do, but I as much as I respect the messages when they do come through, and I absolutely do respect them, and I listen to what they have to bring to me, whenever I'm actively trying to engage in work, as in they've not come to me of their own accord, but I have actively pursued a work with a specific animal spirit, or I've called them in for workings, I really tried to focus on the animals that are native to me. So yeah, it was a moment where I really learned that these deities, they go back so far before the civilizations that we either currently are in or that have recently occurred. These are energies that have been around for such a long time, and that likely primitive human groups experienced in one way or another, but just engaged with them in different ways. I am sure that in many cultures around the world, primitive humans would have engaged with some sort of a death god, right? Because death is one thing that is absolutely assured for all humans. Life, birth, death, these are fundamental things that humans have always experienced from the beginning of time. So it is likely that there has always been a darker, godlike deity that is associated with passing and the darkness and death and fear and those aspects, but he was just called a different name. Now, after I started putting the pieces together in my head, after I had this kind of experience, I have to say that there's a lot in the New Age community right now, or there has been for the last God knows how many years, that almost vilifies, I hope that's the right word, villainizes the masculine. And I understand why, because obviously we have had an age of patriarchal oppression. So I completely understand now why there is a huge balance that needs to take place in bringing back the sacred divine feminine. But I do feel that in the process of doing that, the masculine has almost been demonized now. And what I have found is that actually the masculine energies present to me more frequently than the feminine energies. I don't know why, but it just, on my path, it tends to be the masculine. And the dark masculine, the sacred divine dark masculine, the underworld gods, that are male associated, if we're going on the energies of male or female, they're even more demonized and pushed off far into the edge, far into the abyss. There is obviously people that work with them, but it's just not spoken about as much, or it's not highlighted as much, or people feel fearful. They might have had a lot of negative, awful experiences with male energies, and so they don't feel comfortable going down that path, and that is absolutely understandable and completely fine. But I just wanted to shed some light on Anubis, because when I have experienced him, he comes through as such a loving, protective, beautiful light force. And I know I said earlier that when I was a child, obviously this energy that was around me was not associated with the light. And what I mean by that is, the best way that I can describe it is, when everyone meets their moment of passing, there is this idea that the angel of death is a very terrifying being, is a fearful being. But really, when you think about it, the angel of death is an old friend. He is the one that has stepped forth with the loving eyes, with the kind, gentle smile of reassurance, to ensure you that your journey hasn't ended and that you are just progressing from one aspect to another. Anubis is the gatekeeper of the boundary crossings. And so anytime that I am in a significant period in my life where I feel like I am stepping over this great boundary, a new chapter where one thing dies and new life is about to be brought in, this is what we can work with Anubis for. He is this gentle, familiar face that is so loving and so reassuring and so guiding. And it takes a being with so much love in their heart and so much understanding and care for humans to be able to guide one through the death process. And we can obviously see that as end of life, but we can also see that through the death processes that we go through throughout our life. We will undertake many, many journeys within our story where we will have to let go of things, where we will watch things decay, and we will feel grief and loss and darkness, and we will feel disorientated and unable to find our way forward. And it's easy to speak on this, obviously, when you're in a position currently where you're not going through those emotions. But that's why I want to speak to this, because if there is something that you need to draw strength on, because perhaps you are going through those periods in your life right now, then Anubis is an exceptional energy to work with. Because Anubis is his name that was given in the Egyptian pantheon. But essentially what he is the angel of death. He is, and again, that even in itself has a Christian connotation, right? Angel, it has an attachment that is associated with Christianity. But what I would say is to just go and look back through any culture or any pantheons that you feel really associated with. If you feel really drawn to the Greek pantheon or the Celts or the Norse or the Egyptian or whatever it is, Mesopotamia, Babylonia, any of those pantheons, there's literally countless, and just try and find the energy of Anubis somewhere in there. He who walks one over the boundaries of life and death, he who carries one from one cycle to the next, and he who is the death god, the underworld deity, the sacred dark masculine father. And you will find a version of Anubis in there somewhere that you can relate to from your own cultural perspective. But I will say, as I said before, that I have felt so much love from this deity. And what I mean by that is, when the presence first comes into the room, or when I first experienced him, I was also taken aback. I was like, okay, this is a dark masculine figure, heavier, earthier, chthonic, that sort of energy. But actually, then how he presented himself to me when I realized past those layers was this beautiful masculine figure dressed in a black suit with a black hound next to him, and just the warmest smile and the bluest, clearest eyes. That's how he presented to me anyway, when I actually really recognized him for what he was, and that is to shed all of those names that he's been given across so many cultures over so many centuries. Shed all of those names. He will just present to you how you can most associate with him and how you can most relate to him, and that is perfect to work with him from. So I hope that we had a nice little light-hearted witchy chat about this anyway. As I said, it wasn't really like a scholarly talk, or I wasn't trying to give a history of him or anything like that. It was just more of a devotional piece to him and my experiences. I'm wearing my Anubis emblem here right now. So I hope you enjoyed this, Wildlings, and I'm sending you so much love, and I hope you're having a wonderful day wherever you are. And if you're watching this while Venus is still in Scorpio, then make sure you get sensual and gothic and sexy, and I will speak to you soon.